Wyoming was a territory before it became a state, and the land was completely free for cattle, people who owned cattle to graze. So you had a bunch of like European investors or very rich people who had cows out here, and that's kind of where the cowboy came from. Is the cowboy's responsibility was literally to ride from one city, and I say city, I mean like tent city, to the next tent city, trying to just round up all of the cows, and then they would get them all together, and then that's when they would do the sortings and the brandings based on who owned what. And that kind of came up with the issue of mavericks. And what mavericks are basically they're cows that don't have a mother. And so that means that there's no brand or ownership that can claim the calf. So kind of like during the time of like Manifest Destiny, and you could have cowboys who could homestead, they were starting to take these mavericks, right, that were unclaimed cows to try to bring up their own herds. Most of the time, cowboys actually had money and they were investing in their own cows, but this changed the dichotomy in the cattle industry in Wyoming, where it was taking money away from these rich cattle barons, who, by the way, owned the newspapers on the East Coast, who basically made up the law in Wyoming and had high enough contacts even in the presidency at the time.
That's probably the main local history that we have here. It was in April of the fight itself is in April of 1892, but the events that led up to it actually started probably in about 1878 or 79. The Indians, the last major battle with the Indians was in the fall of 76, right? The same Indians that were in Custer's battlefield were encamped up west of KC in the Red Wall up here, and Chief Dull Knight and mainly the Northern Cheyenne were routed by the Army, and that was the last real Indian battle. After that, the Indians were pretty well subdued and ended up in reservations. And then within a year or 2 years of that, then the cattle started coming in, mainly from out of country or foreigner investors found out about the grass here, and it was considered free grass to anybody that could show up and take advantage of it. So the big cattlemen started coming in, mainly, as they say, mainly were foreigners and big investors, Ireland, England, probably some French too. But
I've heard of the foreign investors. There are a lot of aristocracy almost out here.
Yes, a lot of them were of nobility, and they brought some of their beliefs and their attitudes and stuff with them, and that didn't necessarily sit too well with the local cowboys and stuff. They worked for these big ranchers, but they never really felt like they were a part of their business. They treated like servants or so on, like they had in England, but really most of them didn't really care for that here. So eventually what this came down to about the winter of 1886, the country was overgrown, overgrazed, and overstocked. Then we had a very, very dry summer, and the feed was really short. And then that winter, they had a terrible hard winter, and they lost at that time probably well over 50 to 60%, and sometimes even more of their cattle died in that winter. Of course, there was no supplemental feeding or anything in those days. So the big investors were in pretty dire straits, and eventually if they were missing, when they counted their cattle and they were so short, then they were in a real bind, and then they decided that anybody with cattle then, especially the small operators and so on, they figured they were rustlers, and the big cattlemen actually owned the law. They were through the Wyoming Livestock Association at that time, since they ran the legislature, and they passed what they call maverick laws. You know, any unbranded animal would, according to their maverick law, belong to the Livestock Association, Wyoming Livestock Association, and then when we would have big roundups, and the little guys didn't have much of a chance to get their cattle branded because the big ones wouldn't bring them in. You know, they set the days for the roundup, and they set all the laws, and the little guys either went along with it or they lost all their cattle. So anyway, it came down to the point where they considered anybody that wasn't a member of the association was essentially a rustler.
So they started making these laws about how cowboys couldn't own cows, and you know, in response to that, you had people here in Johnson County who were like, you know what, we're going to create our own association, and we're going to create our own laws and our own rules.
And eventually, there was a man that rose to prominence among local cowboys by the name of Nate Champion. And Nate Champion tried to fight back by forming the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association, which was seen as a way to counter the WSGA's activities. And immediately he was blacklisted. Anybody who was a member of the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association was blacklisted from even collecting cattle. But Nate Champion's organization had a huge following, especially here in the town of Buffalo. So these guys decided to issue a proclamation that they were going to go out and collect their cattle anyway in spring of 1892.
And so they made secondary laws saying, okay, cattle barons shouldn't be able to own cows. So the point is the best solution that the cattle barons could come up with is by deciding to hire assassins from Texas to come here and kill a bunch of people who were a part of the association. And you have to remember, so like back during the time, they made aliases where they would be outlaws in Texas and then come up here and be sheriffs. And right now, so like this cabin right here, that is, the sheriff at the time was Frank Canton. And Frank Canton was an outlaw. He was literally like set to be hung in Texas, and then was able to run away and come up here and be the sheriff here.
Free.
Yes. And by the way, like he was also working kind of in association with the cattle barons.
To my left now is Frank Canton's cabin, and the story goes that when he was 11 years old, he left his family, who had many children in Tennessee. It was the poorest part of Appalachia, and he went himself to Texas. And the woman that I spoke to that actually owns the property, she said that she feels very bad for him because the kind of person to leave your family and go out to Texas, he didn't have much moral upbringing. And he basically escaped a life of lawlessness, because in Texas he killed a Buffalo soldier and he was tried for it, and they later said that it was either self-defense or basically boys will be boys, because you know, you kill a black soldier, back in the day you could get away with it, and him having very little moral upbringing, he kind of understood this. However, after that he robbed a bank and he joined the cattle drives from Texas up to Wyoming, and when he came up here he got in good with a lot of the cattle barons and became a sheriff. Now, the farm, or the Frank Canton's cabin, moved over here from about 2 miles north on Crazy Woman Creek, but he wouldn't have actually lived on the property, because I'm looking right over there now, about 200 yards is the property of one of the cattle barons. They moved this over here in recent years, but they say above all he was quiet, he was calculated, and they feel bad for him because he was truly a genius. And they say the phrase that I heard that I really like, he had a whole universe going on in his mind of how can Frank Canton land on his feet. He was a very calculating person.
So you guys came from Buffalo this way, right? Did you see like John Tisdale Divide? So prior to this episode, these assassins, prior to the assassins coming, allegedly Frank Canton was assassinating people in town who had association with the cowboys. So there's this whole story about how supposedly Frank Canton killed John Tisdale, and the reason why was because somebody saw his horse. And he had a very notable and remarkable horse, but he was said he had an alibi, and he was in town, Anyways, point is that so prior to this, everybody was like working in congru together on trying to get rid of the cowboys. So they hired the assassins. And do you guys know anything about KC and like Nate Champion and Nick Ray? Okay, so in KC they had that cabin where Nate and they were like some of the heads of the association here in Buffalo, working for the cowboys, and that was the assassins' first stop.
I'm supposed to talk about Nate Champion and stuff, and where some of this started out. From what I've been told and where I've seen, he was working at a Bar C ranch out here just southwest of KC, and he was in a cabin, and he was sleeping, and there's like 3 or 4 guys that came in that tried to ambush him, and there were all kinds of gunfire and all kinds of shots and stuff, and he had hit one guy, I know for sure, and supposedly he died, but Nate himself wasn't killed at the time. You go back up, go under the interstate, and there's a Sinclair. Go past the Sinclair, just a little ways. I gotta find there's the road is. Be on Mayworth, you turn on Barnum Road to the left. Okay, and you follow Barnum. Okay, then you come to a Y. You can either go to the right, or you can kind of go straight or stay to the left. You stay to the left, and that'll turn into Bar C Road, and just follow the Bar C Road.
In response to a number of high-profile lynchings of people like Cattle Kate and Jim Averill, a lot of the local ranchers and smaller cattle operations began to realize that they were under the jackboot of Cheyenne. Even to this day, there's a lot of mistrust between these northern Wyoming communities and Cheyenne, the seat of the government. So they decided to form their own stock growers association. Nate Champion spearheaded this, and he called it the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association. And this was the first time that the Stock Growers Association, and by extent all of the politicians in Wyoming Territory, the governor, and all of the aristocrats and cattle barons, faced real opposition and organized resistance to their exploitative practices. And when the Stock Growers Association said, we're declaring a roundup day, the Northern Wyoming Stock Growers Association said, oh, well, we've declared our own, and it's actually a month prior to yours, and we actually don't have the Maverick laws as a bylaw of our Stock Growers Association, so we can collect cattle that don't have brands. And basically this was considered a big no-go, but the Stock Growers Association sent out 3 assassins to kill Nate Champion. And at the time, it was November 1st, probably snow was on the ground, and he was camped just along the northern part of this river. His cabin is now long gone, but the first shootout happened November 1st of 1891, and these 3 men tried to enter his cabin. One stayed outside, and of course it woke Nate Champion up, and of course they didn't identify themselves. They just said, freeze, we got you. Again, they were probably thinking he was a rustler or an outlaw. Well, Nate Champion just reached for his gun, shot one, mortally wounded him. Apparently he died several states away because they were moving his body out. Was the local community was told, hey, the 2 survivors of this, the 2 would-be assassins who survived, they were later ambushed by local ranchers. And there's no way to confirm this, but it might be true. And this kind of precipitated the war because they said, we went in there to go stop rustlers, and the whole community killed these 2 people who were just good, kind-hearted posse members trying to pursue the rustlers. So they sent in the invasion force. We're about 20 miles west of the town of KC to go see where Nate Champion's first fight was on November 1st of 1891. And I just happened to notice this old homestead, and this is actually only a mile or so probably within earshot of the fight, the first fight that Nate Champion had. And apparently there's just homesteads and ranches all over this area west of KC. And a lot of these, I was also told of another fight that was a part of the Johnson County War, where they assassinated some people with the Northern Wyoming Stock Growers Association. And these would be kind of equated to cattle rustlers. So there's no real way of confirming all of the battles that took place in the Johnson County War when you're so close to hole in the wall and outlaw country. And basically people would just say, oh, that wasn't a battle with people that were part of the Northern Wyoming Stock Growers Association. That was just an outlaw that was killed by a posse. So out here, you pass several of these on the way up, which is really interesting. And Casey's over that way.
Well, then later on, he was working here at the ranch, the KC Ranch, which is how KC got its name, is from the KC Ranch. And that's where the battle took place out here, where him and Nick Ray were ambushed and shot and killed.
was they were going to kill those guys, and so they had a whole day shootout where Nick Ray and Nate Champion were held out into the barn, or sorry, in the house. And I think it was Nate Champion who even wrote a diary about like his experience.
Boys, I don't know what they've done with them two fellows that stayed last night. I feel pretty lonesome right now. Well, they've just got through shelling the house like hell. I heard them splitting wood, and I guess they're going to fire the house tonight. I think I'll make a break for it when night comes, if still alive. Shooting again, I think they'll fire the house this time. It's not night yet. The house is all fired. Goodbye, boys, if I ever see you again. Nate D. Champion. And if you want to pan the camera over here, he wrote that the siege lasted many hours, and people could hear this siege going on. And he had one last stand where he gathered all his guns and he ran out the back door. And they shot him like a coward, and they started moving north. But someone who was the neighbor of this man, named Jack Flagg, he overheard the gunshots, and he wanted to come out and help. Of course, they started trying to kill him. He hopped on his horse and started riding north to the town of Buffalo. And the plan was for these mercenaries and their political support, the corrupt political support, to head north to Buffalo, take over the town, and probably kill a lot of people, because the sheriff, or the former sheriff, who had been hired by the Stock Growers Association, he had a list of 70 people to kill, many of which were already killed by the time they murdered Nate Champion. And when Jack Flagg reached the town, they formed a posse of about 200 people and charged south, cutting them off and driving them to the TA ranch. But if you take a look, killed alongside Nate Champion was his longtime friend Nick Ray, who was shot in a very cowardly manner in the same way that Issam Dart was shot by in similar circumstances. He was in the threshold of his cabin, and they just sniped him. Nate Champion and his friend Nick Ray were shot actually just over in this area, and we're just a little bit south of Casey right now. And I think it's fascinating because Nick Champion, they said that he was just a rustler. They said he's an outlaw, and it would be inside of that kind of corral area. And they said it was just an outlaw, but he was really competition because he was the head of the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association, which was the first time they formed direct opposition to the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and the Cheyenne Club. And they needed to put him down, so they basically lied to the invaders and told him he was just an outlaw. And all the invaders were extra eager to kill some outlaws.
Him and Nick were holed up in that cabin. They couldn't get him out, so they finally end up pushing these wagons down into him, getting the cabin on fire.
Oh, they used the same tactics they tried at the TA ranch.
Yeah, and they got it lit on fire, and then
and that's how they fired the cabin.
And Nick was hit before. He went out the door. He got shot early on, and he died earlier that day. But Nate was the only one left, and he was pretty much running out of ammo. His choices were getting pretty narrowed down. So when he lit the cabin on fire, he had to go bailing out. And
I saw the journal entry, and it sounds like a cowardly way that they killed him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the guys that did the killing, the invaders, they were kind of lied to. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association, they told these guys they were hunting outlaws, and killers and stuff. They have no clue they're going after small, innocent ranchers.
And that's an interesting kind of fact, because I've heard there's still some tension between the descendants of the invaders and the descendants of the people that fought against them.
Yeah, for a number of years, it was a pretty touchy subject.
You were saying when your family came over here, around what year was that? There were still feelings?
That was there in one came in 1915, my dad's side, and my mother's side, they came in, I think, 1917. So they were pretty early settlers. That was 100 years ago, but at that time, that would only been like less than 20 years after that. So there was a lot of the same people were still in the country then, and it still was. There were a number of killings and stuff for several years after that. Some of them were solved, and some of them never were. A lot of them were. There was a lot of several killings that led up to the Johnson County Cattle War. Before that, there were several incidents where they, I know of at least two.
So the invaders, they genuinely thought that these were all just hole-in-the-wall gang type cattle rustlers.
Yeah, not the Wyoming stalker so much that hired the gunmen to come up. They were, I want to say, kind of innocent, but they were here to, again, under the assumption that they're going after outlaws and killers and stuff, when they really weren't. Yeah, so right over here in the corner, that little brown building, and then like where that hockey arena is, that's right where the cabin for where Nate Champion was, and Nick Ray, that they had burned down. And he had run off. See a little gully right there? That was the back. That's where he tried to run out. And there were guys up on the hills, and they just basically shot right through there.
And you were saying that the guy that got shot as he left to go get eggs, he was heading over to a ranch that was...
Well, he didn't get shot. They took him captive. There was a barn right over here.
And one of the buildings still dates from that period, right?
Yeah, there's another house over here that still dates over there. And then there was a bridge that crossed the river right over here.
And they went out in the morning to get some eggs and water, and they got arrested by the Stock Growers Association. And apparently there was another building right back here that is still standing that's from this period. And also, this is the bridge where Flagg and his son were aware of the invaders. They heard the gunshots, and they went over the bridge in this area, evaded them, and made their way up to Buffalo to warn the town. And the town began marching south and met them at the TA guest room. It'd be interesting to come back and try to find it. Jack Flagg and his son rode to tell Buffalo that the invaders were coming and that Nick Champion had just been in a shootout with 3 or 4 of them. And this is the first photo I've seen of it, but apparently it's still out there somewhere, just south of Buffalo, or south of KC. And this rifle apparently belonged to Nate Champion and his brother was said to be the last death in the war because he came up here a year later, and someone who was siding with the cattle barons saw him and shot him, because Nate Champion was confronted a year ago or he confronted the guy who shot his brother about a year before the shooting, and that created a blood feud between the Champion family and the guy who shot his brother. And another interesting fact about the murder of Nate Champion is when Flagg actually witnessed the murder and he rode north to Buffalo to warn the town of the invaders, there was another man named Ranger Jones, or Johnny Jones, who was killed, and he was getting wood to go build a cabin just a little ways away from Buffalo, and his brother sees he's not coming home. They find the body, and they see the cart with a bunch of wood on it that's stained with blood. And apparently his cabin is still a good distance away, but it's kind of something that they don't really want made into a tourist attraction. Nowadays, the spot where Ella Watson, or Cattle Kate, was lynched is underneath the Pathfinder Reservoir, and it's just off on Pathfinder Ranch property. It's probably leased by the BLM because the ranches, they are mostly BLM property, which is leased out, but her grave is supposedly on the shores of this lake.
So the story about this property is the guy who originally owned this property was a very wealthy doctor, and he had not alliances, but kind of like he was acquainted with the people who were in the assassins, right? And so he was like, okay, you guys can come out here and hole up here. So that's where you get to this place and this barn and what happened here. So essentially it was a 3-day shootout, and you had, so kind of like where everybody was is up here on this ridge is where the town of Buffalo was, and then kind of like back here there was a little spot where they kind of like dug a hole and like held up inside of it. And this was all in April, and if you've ever like know anything about Wyoming, March and April, this day is going to deceive you because most of the time it's like -30 and it's really kind of crazy. So point is they were so cold that they were just drinking whiskey. In fact, they drank so much whiskey that they like couldn't really shoot at the barn, because we found, I think, 120 whiskey bottles. Yeah, that's a lot of whiskey.
In 3 days.
Yeah, in 3 days, like all in this area. And the holes that only made it to the barn were from buffalo guns, so nobody really got shot. I think there was 2 guys who ended up getting gangrene because they accidentally like shot themselves in the foot. So it was not like a very, I mean, it was a like massive turning point in history in Wyoming, because this was the catalyst between the old way of like with the cattle barons versus like owning it from the cowboys. But it has kind of a really sad ending, because the cattle barons were able to actually call the president of the United States, who issued the cavalry to come down and rescue the assassins. And they did it under this guise like it was unlawful, and you know, they wanted to imprison them, and so they took him to jail, and then they asked the town of Buffalo to pay for the expense of prosecuting them. And then, you know, with the corruption, it just took so long that, you know, basically the town of Buffalo went bankrupt. And then they were let free.
As you can probably tell by the name, Dudley Champion was Nate Champion's brother, Nate Champion being sort of the undisputed hero in the Johnson County War. And Dudley rode into Buffalo about a year later in 1893 looking for work, but this was a very poor decision on his part, because a lot of the upper class Stock Growers Association, WSGA members, and the WSGA still exists, although obviously they don't do this anymore, but one of them by the name of Mike Shontsey saw him and basically shot him on sight. And of course the court, which was still very corrupt at the time, found Mike Shontsey innocent, but it was said that after the first assassination attempt on Nate Champion's life, Nate Champion rode to Shontsey's ranch and said, "You were one of the 3 people who tried to kill me on November 1st of 1891. I demand you tell me who else was there." And because of this, they almost got into a shootout, Nate and Mike Shontsey. And this caused Mike Shontsey to harbor ill feelings towards the entire Champion family. So when Dudley Champion rode in, Nate saw him and just shot him in the chest. And this was the last confirmed death of the Johnson County War.
And you have to understand, these guys died from like sepsis. Like they had a bacterial infection. They had, I mean, so it took them a while to die. And so they were like secondary. It wasn't from an actual gunshot wound here. It was like, so they went off the property and were buried in their hometowns. So nobody really died here at all. Just, yeah, just like a very basic gun battle, you know, classic.
120 whiskey bottles.
Yeah.
No one's really gonna get
Oh, yeah. They were freezing. They were so cold. So it was really like nobody wanted to die. And that's the other thing I did tell you guys is like that at the end of the battle, what they did is they made a go devil, and what that is like it's a wagon where you put dynamite and hay, and so they were going to push this wagon and basically like blow up the barn with all the people inside of it, and that's when the cavalry came in and stopped them. Like at the last minute, at the last second. Yeah. So anyways, so, and you guys can kind of see there are, so you guys can kind of see like over the years, everybody's been put there. So these are brands from other ranches. So this is like the Wine Cup Ranch. And you kind of can see like all of the carvings. Because this property has been privately owned by so many different people, and you have like some ledgers from like 1922 and 1928 and 1931.
What do you think is the most interesting carving here?
This is the TA brand. So that's the original TA brand. That's probably the most interesting one. So kind of what happened with the TA brand is it actually was purchased by somebody in Gillette, and they, I mean, we've been wanting to get the brand back, but it, you know, owning brands is like, it's a $30,000 investment for just a brand. So we have our own family brand that we brand our cows with. But I can kind of show you guys the, sorry, and you can kind of see the bullet holes from this point.
It's wild that nobody died, and it was a 3 full days.
3 full days, yeah.
Well, because you can kind of see, all they had to do is take that one shot. So right where this butterfly cutout is, there's all of these really big holes, and then this we believe was from like a buffalo rifle or something of really high caliber. So it just takes a couple of those shots for the invaders to realize, oh, you know, maybe that might hit us, and that's why they go downstairs.
Well, do you think the townspeople might not have been aiming to kill?
Maybe, but I think at that range, everything is not aiming to kill. It's just aiming to maybe
They were
hit.
just trying not to die.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem, is there was no cover for them at all. So they didn't believe in it enough to try to, like, you know, be the hero and come in here and try to storm them out, which is why they made the Go Devil. And really, like, I just don't think they were anticipating that somebody would be able to leave and, like, call in the cavalry. So they just thought this was going to be like a siege and they could hold them out. And then, you know, literally the cavalry comes riding in here, like there's a ceasefire and they take everybody out.
Yeah.
So I think that was the main problem. And the problem too is weather. Like the weather here is in March and April is horrendous. Like you can't even see in front of you. That's our blizzard season. So that's why today is like
It's the best day.
yeah, the best day ever. But here, this is kind of where the barn ended, and you can see the cutouts. And then the second half of the barn was added in 1910. So, and same thing with the wings on each side.
I heard in the museum that some people in the local area still kind of view Nate Champion and a lot of the people that were involved with this as not the good guys. Is there any ill will towards the families?
Well, I think part of it is that a lot of these guys ended up settling in the surrounding area, the assassins. And so there was controversy in this dispute because you had people who, you know, on each side kind of living together and figuring it out, and you would have thought that they would have left.
Yeah.
But they didn't. So part of this is like, it's this classic idea of land and land disputes and water disputes, and you still, like, have you guys watched Yellowstone at all?
A little bit.
Okay. Yellowstone is like, it obviously is a dramatization, but at the same time, like, the philosophy and thinking is the same. Like, land is gold here. You know, everybody's trying to make money off of cows. We still have horse theft. We actually still have cow theft. And theft is not the right word, is it? Thievery? I don't know. Anyways, point is, we still have those issues. And then the number one thing is water. And when you hit those trigger points of like people's livelihood, and it's as simple as somebody, like for example, our neighbors, they closed the ditch. So there's these little culverts and there's ways that you can change the water flow. They went and changed the water flow and we were like, why aren't we getting water? Well, that simple act is what makes or breaks your entire, like if you're gonna be able to have enough hay to feed your horses. And so like we actually have ditch riders. So people who are like basically appointed by the government to just make sure that water is getting allocated properly. And literally, if it's not, people are out there with guns, getting each other's faces because you are trying to feed animals. You're trying to make a business out of the land. And so that's kind of the thing that I see the most here. Is not really like this history anymore. A lot of those people who were attached to that history, like there's somebody who's literally related to Butch Cassidy in Buffalo and Casey. Like they're like the great granddaughter or something of Butch Cassidy. And she can tell you like what actually happened because she has like personal letters. But those people are starting to die off and it's just not as much of a legacy anymore that is kept in Buffalo. But like you can understand, Wyoming is a thought process, it's a philosophy, it's a mindset, and that has never changed. Yeah. You know, you still get crazy motherfuckers like driving around with guns being like, where's my cow?
So
Yeah.
cattle rustling, that's still, if I were to go on a field and steal a calf, I would just be shot.
Oh,
maybe.
if you trespass, like people are really, like, so we have hunters that trespass all the time. And so that is like really kind of a dangerous scenario because people are really hot-headed. And we've had people like shoot into our cow herds trying to get a deer, and they'll shoot into our hay fields and they'll hit like our irrigation lines, which by the way is like a $20,000 fix. So people are really just like not considerate, and most of the time it's like people take trespassing very seriously because it's money. Like if you kill a deer on your property, that's like $1,000 or $500 in an animal fee that you would be getting. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like trespassing is a huge deal. Like the land is what makes the money. I don't know, Tucker, what do you have to say?
I feel like if you, people are going to defend everything that they have, and a lot of people out here believe that they own a lot. You know, if this is their land, anything that is on this land is mine. It is mine. So don't go near it, don't touch it, and if you do, then they're gonna make sure you know
But it's not yours.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not yours.
And like in the 1900s, and this is what and then you can see the additions that they made. These are the assassins, and this is what the ranch looked like in 1892. So this is the ranch house that we were just in, and then this is the barn. And then this is the cavalry from Fort Phil Kearny, which is where they came from.
Oh, was that the same one with the Fetterman fight?
Yeah, I think so. That's a question for my grandma. She'll know more. And then this is what the Go Devil looked like. And then you can see this is the Cattleman's Stronghold. So when you guys go out there, it's just a tiny little depression in the ground. And so you can see like what they did to hole up.
And so the museum in the town of Buffalo is actually pretty informative. So you have some of the earlier actions that were committed by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and their hired enforcers. You have a couple of people who were killed, hanged, including even law enforcement like rangers. And this was kind of the WSGA saying that we are the law in this part of the country. And so they bring up their invading forces who move right on up to the town of Casper. And the whole way up, they are cutting phone lines, or rather at the time it was telegraph lines. They didn't want the news to reach up to the town of Buffalo that these men from Texas had arrived, about 60 gunmen. They were very well trained, and they were going on a tour with the territorial legislature. And here also you can see Ella Watson and Jim Averill were hanged, and it was a brutal hanging. It was just ruthless what they did to those two people. And so they come up here and they meet in Casper, and they come up to Nate Champion and Nick Ray's cabin. And that is the two graves that we saw a little bit earlier. And Flagg was the man who heard the shootout over at Casey Ranch, rode his horse up and said, "What's going on?" They started shooting at him. So Nick Flagg ran up to the Perry Ranch, the TA Ranch, finally to Buffalo to spread the word, hey, these mercenaries are coming and they probably intend to take out the entire town. And so there was a siege at the TA Ranch, which is where we're headed to next. And they had to come all the way back down after being relieved by the fort, because one of their men escaped, went to an army fort, brought out the military. They occupied the town. They still said we're pretty much on the side of the WSGA, and the mercenaries went back to Texas, but it was still very much, they were in control of the corrupt local government there. But we're going to go see the TA Ranch now.
I've got some pretty fascinating updates to the Battle of Suggs. Basically, if you look at the Wikipedia page, you can see continuing violence and that there was a battle between Buffalo soldiers and a town called Arvada, and just outside of this town was a town that's now vanished called Suggs. And the geography is basically, as the railroad was coming through, Suggs developed as a sort of tent town. And about 4 miles south, they had a military post called Camp Bettins.
The Powder River is pretty wide there, and the Powder River is a pretty treacherous river because there's a lot of sand and quicksand. So you just can't just build a bridge across and think it's going to stay. And then in the wintertime it freezes over, and as the water comes up, it builds up big ice. Then when the ice goes off, it'll take out the bridges, and it does that quite often. But anyhow, when the railroad came, it had to wait there on the east side of the Powder River, so a little railroad town called Suggs boomed up, and it's an end of the trail railroad town, which actually has all the worst elements you can think of. You had brothels, and you have gamblers, and you have gun shootouts. But during the Johnson County War, they sent 2 regiments, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry, to, it was called Camp Benhams. It was 4 miles south of suggs.
And Camp Benton's and Suggs themselves, Suggs was a railroad town. It was only meant to be there until the railroad continued, and then Suggs would basically move with the railroad. But because the Powder River was right there, they decided to erect a fort just in case the Indian Wars kicked back off.
And this is where Suggs was.
And they stationed black cavalrymen there. They stationed Buffalo Soldiers. Well, 3 of these Buffalo Soldiers decided to disobey the order not to cross the bridge and not to go into the railroad town. They disobeyed this, they went in there. And in the town you've got liquor, you've got prostitutes, sex workers. It's a lawless town.
And the reason why they sent them there, because they sent them there to keep the unrest between the homesteaders and the ranchers. Well, it ended up, the 3 of these Buffalo Soldiers, they thought they weren't supposed to leave camp. They were supposed to stay where they were at. So anyhow, they decided they wanted to go down and get a little nookie and have a little drink. Well, the locals didn't cater to that going down there. So they had a little shootout. And actually, 2 of the black soldiers got killed and 1 got wounded. The battle took place as they were going back to the camp. And that would be 4 miles straight south on the Powder River. And at that time, the town of Arvada did not exist.
And where do you think the soldiers were buried?
They were buried at a kind of a horseshoe bend, and it was actually on state land. Through the years, that has washed wider and wider and worse where the camp existed away. For that, you could at one time even find at the firing range, you could find bullets and stuff. But that was one of the things they always had to go shooting every week.
Well, they go back to the fort, and apparently they muster 20 of their troops to come back into town, and it's almost a race war. Now, this is where history gets very murky, because the official report doesn't detail any of this, but I met kind of an eccentric lady drinking in her hometown. She was in her 90s, and she tells me that it was the black soldiers who were rallying their troops, and they were about to go massacre the town, and the white officers executed 2 of them. And I didn't think much of it until we got back to this museum here, and there is documentation saying that 2 black soldiers were buried at Camp Benton's. Now, it was different dates, and it was different causes. Apparently 1 black soldier was at the firing range, and a cowboy came up and said, "Hey, can I shoot?" And the black soldier says, "Sure, go ahead." And he kind of just stands there for a minute, and he says, "Are you going to shoot?" And the cowboy says, "Yeah," and he shoots the black soldier.
Yeah, so the lady in town was saying that the 2 soldiers were killed by their commanding officers trying to go into town and solve a dispute, but Private Willis Johnson died, basically in that riot or that scuffle, but Brown died just by a cowboy trapper or scout stopped by the rifle range and asked if he could shoot. They said yes and waited for a shot. He didn't shoot, so 1 soldier supposedly, Brown said, "When are you going to shoot?" And the man shot the soldier. Wow. Wow.
So he's buried alongside the other soldier, I believe Private Johnson, and eventually the Powder River changes course and washes the graves out. But probably locals were talking about the fact that there's 2 graves right next to each other from the same year, because the fort lasted for 7 months of the same year, and they surmised that they knew that there was a pretty large battle and that 20 black soldiers did come into the town. They probably put 2 and 2 together and mixed the stories up, and you have a little bit of embellishment, and before you know it, there's the story of a borderline race war.
Well, they were actually buried where the camp was. But this is over, well, now it's 125 years ago or more. And since then, the river's changed channels and washed where the camp used to be out, and they buried them under a couple cottonwood trees, and they put their niches in the cottonwood trees. Well, since then, the cottonwood trees have died and are gone. And probably, I don't know exactly where, probably the bodies or what's left of them got washed away too. Okay, here's Camp Benton's right here. And here is the trees, the names of the trees. Johnson was the one that killed. He was killed in 1892. But that's it. And then, that tells about Camp Bentham's there. If you want whatever you want to take. And Kathleen, this is a tour they took. And I don't know what year this was.
Oh, they have rifle pits. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that lady in town was talking about.
Mm-hmm. See, it's from June 1892 to November.
It didn't last long.
7 months. There was no battle. It was just a shootout there when these 3 Buffalo soldiers came to Suggs, and there was a battle. So I don't know where the battle came from. There is quite a bit. There's a couple places I've read about the inquiries when they had the investigation.
So it looks like there was just war in the town pretty often. That's like hole in the wall.
Yeah, I mean, I should take that home and read it, because I haven't really read all the stories about it. I just kind of knew.
Keep talking about Camp Benton's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also Tom Gardner caught a 3-pound catfish. We'll go interview him about that.
And here's somebody recalls some of the saga of the Sluggs town. That was in the 60s there, that article.
Well, it's so crazy to see so much about Suggs collected, and then you Google it, and there's almost nothing.
Yeah. And of course, it's old history, nobody. But you go to the newspapers, you'll hear. Of course, the newspapers, again, they don't know the whole truth. They're just reporting what was told.
Oh, and this is the only thing I can really find online. I've seen this everywhere.
Have you? Okay.
I wonder if this guy's still around.
But I remember reading when they did the investigation of what they came up with. But I can't remember where I read that at.
I'm sure you could request it from a military records department.
Yeah, somebody would have it. In the night. Boy, they embellished that.
Oh, they still embellish it down there. That one woman in Arvada was saying that it was basically a coup and the white commanding officers killed 2 black soldiers.
Is that what she said?
She did.
Oh, I never heard that before.
But they died on separate dates, and one of them, he got shot by basically an outlaw.
Yeah.
But this is the official report for the Department of the Platte, which I don't think the department lasted that long, did it?
I don't know.
And that's where.
And I know I've read this annual report of Secretary of State, 1892.
Same woman actually told me that she was an educator, and in her younger years, she met the fiance of Nate Champion. And according to her, Nate Champion never rustled cattle, and the fiance was still able to produce a promise ring that Nate Champion gave her.
They moved the county line. Arvada used to be in Johnson County, apparently.
And Sheridan County in 1888 became Sheridan County, and it all came from Johnson County.
Is there a reason that they changed it? Was there a county seat?
Well,
war?
as the population increased, they divided up. I think 1911 was the last time they created the final counties, and I can't remember. I think there was 3 or 4 of them then, and that included the 23 counties. But some counties are pretty good size.
The famous Occidental Hotel was used in both sides of the Johnson County War, and its history in the Wild West stretches to the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Calamity Jane, Roosevelt, Canton, and Sheriff Red Angus. And actually, after the Johnson County War, Angus couldn't win re-election because the controversy around him was swirling, so he took up a job as a bartender here. And it's said, and this might be conjecture in the papers, that after Nate Champion died, and this is by people who say that Champion was a rustler, and he wasn't, there was another man who started leading the rustlers, and Nate Champion was kind of a leader of the Cowboys. So he might have just been a leader of the Cowboys, but they claim that this new guy was the leader of the Red Handkerchief Gang. And the Red Handkerchief Gang rolls into town, and they walk inside the bar, and they basically tell Sheriff Angus, who's now just a bartender, "You betrayed us. You could have really killed all those guys down at TA Ranch." And a shootout ensues. They go out into the street, they start shooting, and a guy at the drugstore across the street walks over after about 10 minutes and says, "It's funny you guys carry those guns. You can't hit for anything." And they laugh and say, "We guess we can't shoot for a damn." And the new gang leader, the rustler leader, or the cowboy leader, whatever you want to call him, just pats the sheriff, the ex-sheriff Angus's back, and they pat it out, and they become basically like brothers. And at least that's the story of the Johnson County War at the Occidental. But I've heard from the TA Ranch, from other people in the local area, everyone says they see the characters of the ghosts, and Nate Champion and Sheriff Canton always coming and going from this bar.
I'd forgotten the name, but that lady in Arvada said that Nate Champion's fiance that she knew personally was of the Bull family. She doesn't remember her first name, but founders of the hotel.
After the Johnson County War had officially ended, killings went on along the same grain. Wealthy cattle owners would hire out stock detectives to go and eliminate their competition. And this is evidenced by the murder of Willie Nickel. He was murdered on July 18th of 1901, and he was a very young child. And the story goes that one of the neighboring ranchers went and hired Tom Horn, an infamous killer that was hired out during the Johnson County War. He killed people like Issam Dart and was more or less just a hitman. He saw Willie Nickel wearing his father's coat and hat and riding on horseback. And even though Willie Nickel was just a young teenager, he shot Willie Nickel. And as he was sitting along with a sheriff and a sheriff's deputy, they were both in plain clothes in a bar, Tom Horn was bragging, "Yeah, I killed that kid a few days ago." So the sheriff was able to get enough testimony and incriminating evidence to finally convict Tom Horn of the killing. And Horn spent the last 3 years of his life, rather 3 months of his life, weaving his own noose. He really thought he'd get away with it because he was in good with all of the cattlemen and a lot of the corrupt politicians still in Cheyenne. But Willie Nickel was buried here in the backyard of the Stock Growers Association. On my left side here is Crazy Woman Creek, which flows all around the town of Buffalo, Wyoming, where a lot of these events happen. And the story goes either one of two things, and we have no historic documentation for either, but one story says that it was a crazy Native American woman whom everybody else just kind of let live on her own in a teepee along the creek. Another story goes that it could have been a wagon train and that the Native Americans killed this woman's family and they saw her as no real direct threat, so she lived distraught next to the creek for the rest of her short life. And from talking to the family here, they say that the office, the kind of home, is on top of an area which they feel is blessed, and that just up over the hill they see that there is a circle of teepee rings, and they feel that that area has a more positive energy, but that this creek flows through it, and there's a lot of, they say, not necessarily evil feelings. They do feel evil feelings, but that there is also, you would call it residual hauntings. They feel that half the hauntings are from the people in the town, but that the other half are sort of energies that are attached to the land. And this happens along the Crazy Woman Creek right here. Asa Mercer is one of those people who got wrapped up in the Johnson County War, but his history begins decades prior to this war over in the Pacific Northwest. He's one of the first people to spearhead the push to move the average Joe out to the West, and he did what was called Mercer's Girls. Basically, he brought in a dozen women because the idea was you have in these areas lumberjacks, you have miners, you have gold prospectors, but you don't really have many women. and he spearheaded the push to start a university up in the Pacific Northwest, and then he started moving women in. And for this, he was wildly popular, and with his reputation earned, he moved down to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and took up a job for the cattle interests. He was basically the author for their Range magazine, which was their public relations outfit. And he was writing about how they were capturing, their stock detectives were doing a great job finding all these rustlers, but he quickly comes to realize, because he's a smart man, these rustlers are simply people who oppose the cattle barons. So he writes The Banditti of the Plains, which is a fascinating expose on the Johnson County War, but because it was a territory and because all of the judges were associated with the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, they sued him for libel, and of course he lost. So they gathered up every copy of that book they could find and they burned it in the street. And then mysteriously, Mercer's office burns down. Wonder who did that? So Mercer, a few years later, tries to publish this book again, and he tries to publish a second edition and ship it down to Colorado because there's a lot more workers' rights movements. You've got the Colorado labor wars going on, and he figures they'll be more receptive. But somewhere between where he shipped the books off from and the Colorado border, it seems that this wagon train simply vanished. So nobody really knows what happened to this wagon train. I found no information about it. Either they were tipped off and paid to just dump the books in some ravine, or they were probably maybe even killed. Nobody knows. And this is one of the reasons why I say this history is totally written out of the textbooks, because it's still to this day very difficult to find a copy of the Banditti of the Plains. Naturally, some of them escaped, some of them were taken as souvenirs by the people burning them, and were passed down as family heirlooms. And these were things that were highly, highly prized by Western historians, but because they were so prized, it was sort of an exclusive club. You couldn't read it. But eventually, I think in the 1970s, one of them made it to a printing office, and a more recent edition was published.
And I actually just visited Asa Mercer's grave and talked about on video how difficult it was to get your hands on a first edition of the Banditti of the Plains. And you can see they're rare enough to show up here in the museum. Most of these were burned in the streets of Cheyenne.
And it's still difficult to find copies of it because people will go into libraries, check them out, and then not return them. Presumably, they're just hiding them somewhere. Because a lot of the folks out here, a lot of the politicians, they make their platform off of, I'm a rancher just like you. But maybe their great-great-grandfather, maybe their grandfather, was someone who was involved with the cattle wars on the bad side, was a baron, was the guy who killed their constituents' great-great-grandfather. And so a lot of this is kept very tightly under wraps. For example, all it takes is to look up the Battle of Suggs, or the Suggs Affair. I can find next to no information on the Suggs Affair, and it's something that's been written out of Wyoming's textbooks. But this was apparently a battle that pitted black soldiers against the cattlemen. And this is something, again, almost no information exists about it because it's been written out of the textbooks. And I was even messaged by people saying this is history that a lot of people want to remain silent. But I hope I'm doing a good job at kind of objectively reporting it.